In Russia this week, the General Prigozhin was killed when the aircraft he was flying on was exploded in the air and crashed on the ground. Protests are now happening with the women against the Ultraorthodox Jews in their very communities. The Red Heifers are approaching the age of qualifying for their sacrifice for the ashes of the Red Heifer. Shin Bet has now been called in to help curb Arab-on-Arab murders because the PA is crumbling. Divisions in Israel continue over the judicial overhaul, and the world is racing toward the Great Tribulation. Messianic World Update begins now. Shalom, everyone. I'm Monte Judah with Ministries, and welcome to another edition of Messianic World Update. Today's date is Friday, August 25 of the year 2023. I'm sure you saw the news this week about the crash of a private airplane, that was carrying General Prigozhin. He's the head of the Wagner group, the mercenary group that Putin has used in Ukraine and in other nations for Russia's interest. As you recall, Prigozhin apparently marched on Moscow and not too long ago, and then suddenly stopped, and the coup that was attempted against Putin was peacefully concluded. But we all knew that since Prigozhin had come against Putin, and oh, by the way, Putin has a reputation for taking out anybody who's his critic or anybody who's opposed to him. In fact, in intelligence circles, they call him the master of payback. It is now clear that that airplane was at 28,000 feet when it suddenly dropped some 8,000 feet in less than 30 seconds and ultimately crashed. It appears there was no missile that came up from the ground. There was an explosion on board that airplane that brought it down. It appears there was a bomb placed on the airplane. U.S. intelligence has not yet confirmed exactly what's going on, but all the probabilities and suspicions are pointing at Putin as getting revenge against this general. In Israel, as I shared with you last week, the Ultraorthodox has been discriminating against women in Israel, secular women and so forth, forcing them to sit at the back of the buses, don't want to hear them singing songs, don't want to hear them in the attire they're going out into the public. And they've begun to oppress women, and the women have begun to object. Benjamin Netanyahu made a public statement this last week saying he will not tolerate discrimination against women, particularly on public transportation, and that those doing so will be arrested. However, and in following up with that, several women's groups in Israel banded together, went into the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, and held a major protest against the ultra-Orthodox in their own community. There is great fear in the land of Israel on the part of secular Jews that the ultra-Orthodox, which only constitutes about 15% of the people that live in Israel, that somehow their involvement in the government right now under Netanyahu's right-wing coalition will begin to oppress and reduce the freedoms of the secular Jews. Israel is a collection of Jews that have come from all the different nations with different cultures, different ways of observing the faith. Many of them are not observant in the faith, and the ultra-Orthodox, of course, extreme in their observance of their faith. But they're fearful that the ultra-Orthodox are going to control things and take away liberties for secular Jews. Women in particular are targeted for this, and they are the first to see this kind of discrimination. It's terrible what's taking place in Israel, and you can understand why even the Jewish people don't like the ultra-Orthodox Jews and the way they behave. We also ran a story some time ago about the 5 red heifers that were brought out of Texas, and because of the circumstances of COVID, they weren't tagged as normal cattle are. They were untagged. They were no burden had come to the animals, and they qualified as a red heifer. They were shipped to Israel back last year. Everybody's excited about them coming. And as we come to this springtime, they are now coming to the age of qualifying for the sacrifice of the red heifer. What that means is that they will inspect them, and if there's not more than two white hairs on the animal, that will potentially be sacrificed to make the ash of the red heifer. There's only 9 red heifers in the entire history of Israel that have been done in this procedure. This will be the 10th one, so it's rather significant. And by the way, it's raising the interest in Israel for the rebuilding of the temple and reestablishing of the altar. Those are all things that we've been watching closely, because those are the key elements that lead to the sign of the end when the abomination of desolation prophecy occurs. This is exactly as the Messiah told us. Because of the Palestinian Authority collapsing and falling apart, I shared with you about Mahmoud Abbas is becoming very ill. He doesn't have a successor. He replaced several governors that are in the various Palestinian provinces. And as a result, the Arabs are turning on the Arabs. The Palestinians are turning on the Palestinians, and they're trying to gain control. Iran is right in the middle of this, trying to seize control, particularly in the West Bank, like they have done with Hamas in Gaza. And as a result, Arabs are going around killing Arabs. They're murdering. And there's enough of it going on that they've called out the Israeli government and said, you got to do something about protecting Arabs from other murderers. So Shin Bet, which is the internal intelligence department of Israel, joined with Israeli police, are now investigating those murders and going to try to stop and curb them from taking place. That's a very significant step on the part of Israel, truly trying to help the Palestinian people. Now, as you've been following the judicial overhaul protests that have been going on for many, many weeks, the number of divisions that are now taking place in Israel, the number of controversies that are taking place surrounding the government, surrounding society in Israel, it's off the scale. And in fact, there's great, great concern. This is the most traumatic time in the history of Israel, coming up on 75 years they've ever faced. In fact, there are some that are even more concerned about Israel than they were in the War of Independence when they were trying to just survive. This obviously weakens Israel, and the enemies of Israel are watching this closely. Hezbollah has commented on this. Iran has commented on it. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad has talked about this. They are becoming emboldened to possibly attack Israel because of the internal strife in Israel. Truly, for the people of Israel, we need to pray for them. We need to find a way that they can be at peace with one another and compromise and get along with each other, because it's ripping the country apart. If you look around the world, the number of stories of Christians being persecuted, slaughtered, killed, churches being burned, people of faith that believe in the Messiah being attacked all over the world. This world is racing toward the Great Tribulation. The Messiah specifically cited for us when he described the beginning of sorrows, that he said we would be delivered up to the tribulation and we would be killed. We clearly see that taking place. We clearly can see the words that the Messiah gave in answering the questions of the disciples. What would be the sign of the end of the age? What would be the sign of your coming? We are the first generation in the history of the world that can literally look at daily events and trace them directly to the words of what the Messiah said in answering the questions of the disciples. This is not a time to be sleeping. This is a serious time even for us. Now, I've got some good news for you. God has also promised us deliverance. He's promised us that we will escape those things and survive those things. We may have to endure some things, but we're supposed to be around to see the coming of the Messiah. I leave you with that word of encouragement. I trust that you will enjoy your Sabbath as we continue on watching what is happening in the world, and in particular what is happening in Israel. Shabbat Shalom to all of you.